Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Neurodiversity in Focus, Understanding and Empowering All Minds. I'm going to give folks a second to join us. I see that we have over 200 people all here already, which is super exciting. If you would like, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with the city you are joining us from so that folks can see who's here and we can get to know each other. Welcome Anne from Milwaukee, Tiffany from Lafayette, Louisiana. That's where my mom's side of the family is from. Wow, all the cities are rolling in so fast. I'm not going to be able to read it all, but we have someone from Germany, Denver, Colorado, Montana, New York, Sacramento, Atlanta, Kentucky. Welcome, everyone. I love to see where folks are joining us from. We have a good amount of people here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Margaux Joffe, she, her pronouns. I'm a proud neurodivergent woman, a board-certified cognitive specialist, and the founder of Minds of All Kinds. In all of my work, I am passionate about empowering neurodivergent people to thrive in their careers. For a brief visual description, I am a white woman in her 40s with a brown bob haircut, wearing a bright apricot kind of blouse shirt, and I'm in my home office. Behind me are hexagonal sound absorption panels. I'm going to start with a couple housekeeping items to make sure everyone is set up for today's discussion. Number one, this webinar is being recorded and a closed caption version will be shared with you via email in a couple days. If you would like to view the closed captions now, please select Live Transcript button on your toolbar, which is located at the bottom of the Zoom window, and press Show Subtitles. As you can see, we have our ASL interpreters signing. Thank you for being here. If you have a question for our panelists today, please select the Q&A button on your toolbar, enter your question, and click Send. So you can enter your questions at any time, and the National Organization on Disability team will be helping to collect the questions for us at the end. At the end of the webinar, the NOD team will have a simple survey. We hope that you will take it to share your feedback, and that is helpful for them as they shape their programming. I'd like to pause now to do a quick access check to make sure everybody is set up to enjoy this webinar. If you're having any technical difficulties or there are any accessibility issues, please let the National Organization on Disability team know by entering in the chat or messaging them. All right. The last piece of logistics is that as the moderator, part of my job is to keep time for us, which is a little bit funny and a little bit challenging because I myself live with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which means sometimes I am in my own time zone. Time can work differently for those of us with ADHD. It can shrink, it can expand, it can feel elusive and slippery. And so I use assistive technology to support myself. And what that looks like today is I have a visual timer here, which is a time timer. So you can, I'm holding up a small palm size timer, and it shows a orange wedge to represent how much time is left. So as you can see, I have 5 minutes left before I start questions for our first panelist. And I share this because the National Organization on Disability really wanted today's conversation to be practical and share tangible, small things that all of us can do to make the workplace more inclusive. So this is one practical example to show that as neurodivergent people, there are skills that we can learn and there are tools that we can use to empower ourselves. And with that, that is a great segue to our topic. So we are here today to talk about the topic of neurodiversity in the workplace. Thank you to the National Organization on Disability for organizing this important discussion. Before we start, I actually want to hear from you, the audience, where we have a brief poll. I want to see where you are in your learning journey when it comes to neurodiversity in the workplace. So there's two questions and I will read them, and a poll should pop up on your screen. So the first question is, on a scale from 1 to 5, how familiar are you with today's topic of neurodiversity in the workplace? 1 being you're brand new, never heard of it. 5 being you are an expert. I could hand the mic over to you and you could take over from here and do my job. I'm seeing the votes come in. All right. It looks like we have about 1 in 10 of you say that you're slightly familiar. About half of you are moderately familiar. You have basic understanding. And about a third of you, it looks like 4 out of 10 are very familiar or have expert level knowledge. Really interesting to see who's in the room. NOD team said that our audience was going to be beyond the basics. So we are ready to go beyond the basics today and get into some specific details. Okay, second question. Do you know someone in your life who is neurodivergent? Wow, 92% of you said yes. 3% said no, and 5% said not sure. Well, if you said not sure, now you can change that to a yes because you know me and you're about to meet our other panelists. So my hope is that no matter where you are on your learning journey when it comes to this topic, you will leave today with at least one new tip or piece of information that you can take back into your everyday work. So neurodiversity, we're here today to talk about neurodiversity. Our workplaces are made up of minds of all kinds. I'm talking about people who have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, OCD, bipolar disorder, traumatic brain injury, long COVID, a whole spectrum of experiences that impact how we think, how we process information in our environment, how we communicate, how we collaborate. But not all workplaces are designed for the diversity of minds that we have in our human species. We have 2 people here today that are working to change that, Hiren Shukla and Lee Hudson. So I am going to go ahead and I think the NOD team, the poll is completed. All right. Transitioning. There was something that popped up on the screen with the poll. So I'm transitioning my attention back to our introduction because I want to make sure our guest is introduced properly. Welcome, Hiren. I'm really pleased to bring in our first panelist, Hiren Shukla. Hiren is the EY Global and America's Neurodiverse Center of Excellence leader. What that means is 10 years ago, actually in March, he helped EY start the Neurodiversity Center of Excellence 10 years ago. He has been doing this work for a long time, has so many great insights to share. But he's also has more than that in his background of experience. He has more than 20 years as a leader at EY, working in strategy, innovation, transformation, and he's been a pioneer in helping organizations understand neurodiversity, not just as an inclusion effort, but as a powerful talent strategy. Hiren, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Margaux, I would not be anywhere else. I think any chance we get to provide information to inspire, to ignite, to build a sense of camaraderie, I think we're all here to figure out how do we create a better world. And I think joining you and Lee today is my honor. So thank you, Margaux, for having me today.
All right, we're going to talk about all the great work EY is doing, but I want to start with you. and
Okay.
your own unique brain. So when we met, you described that early in your career, you had moments where you felt like you were on one planet and everyone else was on another. And I'm
Yeah.
sure people here in the chat, if you are neurodivergent, you can relate to this. I know I can. I'm curious, what changed? And when you found that right environment for you, what did you learn about your own unique brain and your own unique strengths?
Yeah. Margot, so many of us second guess and question ourselves, particularly when the masses, the group is in one side and you're like in another you're in another solar system. And I think you start questioning your confidence, your self-esteem, your self-worth. Do I really understand this? But I think the beauty then and the inflection point for me was then actually appreciating that it's all of our differences that actually make innovation, transformation, better outcomes happen. And frankly, as I rose in my leadership, my obligation to talk about that, to show it, and to be that, so that we kind of give permission to others then to be themselves as well. So Margot, it was finally that understanding, and funny enough, it was 7 years into the neurodiversity journey that I learned that I'm neurodivergent myself. Um, and so with my ADHD diagnosis and then most recently my dyslexia diagnosis, it was like this chapter in my human being user manual that's been missing all of these years. But when it clicks in, you understand yourself better. You're able to show up better. You'll be able to explain how and where you do great work and maybe where you need support. And maybe this is where, our teaming and camaraderie come in. So um, it's been a journey of opening up and frankly, I think reframing from a deficit space perspective to what are the unique strengths each of us bring.
Yes, absolutely. I love that you use the word user manual because as someone who is neurodivergent, that has been a game changer for me is just understanding my brain does work differently and building my own user manual. And it's something that everyone can benefit from. And you also mentioned giving ourselves permission. When we actually give ourselves permission to support ourselves and do things differently, if we need to work a little differently or communicate a little differently, um, we give other people that permission too through our example.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this work for a while, 10 years. March 2016, you launched EY's Neurodiverse Centers of Excellence. Um, Looking back at the last 10 years, what are some of the results that you are most proud of from the work that you've done at EY?
Yeah. Margot, I think that the challenge of building a repeatable model that you can scale, that you can sustain, and you frankly have to do this all over the world. So you're in different cultures and contexts and languages. I think what I'm most proud of is one, had to build a model that would prove that it drives better outcomes. And I think this is the key difference. While all of us have lived experience, we work in large organizations that have real obligation and need for business outcomes. And how do we connect our lived experience to business outcomes? So I was focused on the outcome side of it and the model that aligns sourcing, skilling, and support. And frankly, the biggest aha moment, Marco, was I'm sorry, are you pausing me?
I realized there might be people here that don't know what what the center does.
Ah, yes.
So
Okay.
in your answer, would you mind what's the couple second overview?
Sure.
I probably should have asked that
No,
first.
that's fine. The concept, regardless of whether it's a center or not, is the same in any organization. You have business strategy, you have people strategy, like HR strategy, and then you have inclusion strategy. And the model effectively brings all three of these and synchronizes them together so that you're not just anchored only on HR strategy, only on inclusion strategy, or only on business strategy. And that's really the concept that grew out of how do we create neurodiversity for all or neuroinclusion for all and make that business as usual. So, Margaux, that was the premise. And the hypothesis was if you can do that, you will create speed and innovation and engagement and outcomes and metrics that far exceed anything we've ever seen before. Because as you can hear, we are betting on the power of thinking differently. And I'm saying power of thinking differently will outstrip anything in the whole world. So, Margaux, that was really the concept that not just at EY, but all of the great companies that I've been able to work with around the world, it resonates because it starts to say, business leader, you're a part of this, HR leader, you're a part of this, and inclusion leader, you're a part of this. And by the way, that means the lived experience, the ERGs and the BRGs, and all of your employees that are, unfortunately, in many cases, hiding in plain sight. Their voices matter, and let's make sure we're creating the right conditions and environments. And that, I think, Margaux, I'll end with that single biggest aha moment wasn't actually the neurodivergent individuals. They're already there. It was the environment, the psychological safety, their leadership, the ways of working, all the things that surround them that either will compress or unlock this great capacity and talent that we're all sitting on and have.
So I know quite a bit about the work that you've done, but for folks here who may not be familiar, can you just break it down? Is the EY Center of Excellence, is it a hiring program? Is it like what, just in plain language, what is it?
Yeah. It is not a hiring program. It is a business model and strategy. And this is where those three components, HR, inclusion, and business strategy, all come together to drive outcomes. And so as we launched in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in March of 2016, not much knowledge, but a lot of energy and enthusiasm. Today, with some of our great clients, has now spread in 25 cities and 15 countries around the world. And it has directly and indirectly employed, onboarded, and engaged over 10,000 neurodivergent individuals. So it is the probably single largest employment model that we see in the world. And frankly, again, the goal always is you don't need a center of excellence. You need a business strategy. And Margaux, that's really where me and my team focused on how do we orchestrate business, HR, and inclusion strategy to drive better outcomes and business outcomes as well as people outcomes.
Got it. 10,000 people getting jobs at EY because of the changes that you're making operationally across the business.
Yeah, Margaux, I will clarify 10,000 is not just EY. It's the great companies that we've been able to implement this program with and frankly said, hey, we're also committed to inclusion. We also need higher skills in the workplace. And so that's the great benefit of working with an amazing global organization to do things, whether it's in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, whether it's in Cochin, India, or it's in San Jose, California, but it kind of spans the globe.
Well, the work that you're doing is really important. And 9 years ago, I was at Yahoo and working on a proposal to create a neurodiversity employee resource group. And at the time, I was trying to put together a business case for leaders to understand. And EY was one of the only companies out there that was doing anything around neurodiversity. And so thank you because of your leadership and your work, I was able to say, look, EY is doing this. Here's another proof point as to why we should be doing this too. So in your work with leaders, when you're working with your other client companies and with leaders across your own organization, what are some of the misconceptions that you come across when it comes to neurodiversity, and what do you want people to know instead?
Yeah, Margot, I really like this question because if we don't acknowledge and recognize that there is unfortunately pre-existing perception, there's stigma. This is what people see on Netflix and TV. This is not reality for what we know that at least 20% of the workforce today, 53% of the Gen Z population who identify as being neurodivergent, leaders understanding that differences in learning, thinking, communication, and socialization styles, which inherently exist with neurodivergent individuals and neurodistinct individuals, that those differences are actually advantages. And I think, Margot, the biggest kind of leader adjustment, and we released a global research study back in July of 2016, 2025, sorry, just a year ago. We'll put the link into the chat for you all to access, so please download it. 22 countries, 2,200 professionals working in large organizations. So we literally spanned every region in the world. And we had both neurodistinct individuals and neurotypicals in there. And what we found is the single biggest driver for neuroinclusion is that manager, is their leader. And while that leader is the one that creates psychological safety, and frankly, understanding that why sometimes slowing down up front creates more speed later on, and meeting people where they are. So you don't lead a group of 20 people, you lead 20 individuals who operate that way. Um, Doing all of that creates tremendous value, and 42% of neuroinclusion comes from that manager or that leader. But I'll leave with one last thing, Margot, is that the research also found that there is a manager lottery that's happening in the workplace today, which means, am I going to win the lottery and get a great manager? What happens if that manager leaves? And that means now the onus, the obligation to have a systematic leadership skill really resides on the organization and the enterprise itself. Because the best manager in the world cannot be best if they are working in a system where performance management is skewed towards neurotypicals and not inclusive of everybody. So these are the type of ways that we're seeing leadership shift in a manner that begins to break down preconceived notions of what strengths look like, and particularly in today's age of AI. I think creativity and curiosity, questioning, being a little bit skeptical about an answer that Gen AI will give you so that you can review it properly. All those are needed more than ever, and I think align very well to the neurodistinct community.
So one of the major takeaways from your research that we're hearing is that your manager is the number one predictor of neuroinclusion, and that not all managers have the awareness or skills to lead neuroinclusively. That is a great transition to bring on our next guest, Lee Judson, who has tons of stories and tips for managers. So we're going to hear from Lee, and then we're going to come back together for a discussion and questions from the audience. Thank you, Hiren.
Hi. So I'm
Hi.
Lee Judson. I'm Lee Judson, and I'm brown hair, kind of curly, in a blue sweater with a black t-shirt. How's
Welcome,
that?
Lee. I'm going to do a little razzle dazzle for you. So, our next guest is Lee Hudson. She is a life map coach at the Association for Autism and Neurodiversity. She's passionate about helping neurodivergent young people prepare for the workforce. Before she shifted to do this work full time, Lee spent decades in the trenches within major corporations. She led three major corporate transformations. Six Sigma, Lean, all that stuff. If you know, you know. She has a wealth of practical wisdom to share on bridging the gap. Lee, my first question for you. You recently published this book, Bridging the Gap, a field guide to neurodiversity in the workplace. Congratulations. What inspired you to write this book?
So after being in these large corporations for a number of years, more numbers than I'd like to say, Um, I've always noticed that, including myself and my children, that moving from college into the workplace, your college teaches you economics, business, whatever it is that you're taking in classes. They do not teach you the unwritten rules of how to go into the workplace. They do not teach you how to speak to your manager. They do not teach you how to advocate for yourself. They do not teach you the rules of the one-on-one, which is the meeting that you own, not your manager. They do not teach you about time management in the workplace. They don't teach you how to be in a meeting. These are all skills you need to have to survive once you get into the workplace. And so I have a belief that this should be a course in college, and it'll help Hiren, that's for sure, with what he's working to do. And it will also teach better management skills. So you will have better managers. So you won't have what I was reading about in the chat, and what Hiren talked about, management lottery, because you will learn these better management skills and inclusion skills in college. And we will have that start to filter through as better skills in the workplace and hopefully better culture.
Oh man, I wish they taught all this stuff in college. It would have made my life so much easier entering into the workplace. So you talked about unwritten rules, and it makes me think about oftentimes the workplace friction that happens is because of these unwritten rules and also communication mismatches. Can you share some real examples of common friction points in daily communication and collaboration in the workplace, and really like the toll that this can take on people?
So especially when you're neurodivergent so I am newly diagnosed. I
Welcome.
assume, thank you. I'm part of the clan now. So I was self-diagnosed prior because my daughter is diagnosed as ADHD and my son autistic. And so every time they went to get tested, they said, "Don't worry about it. You got it from your mother." So because they would meet me as a part of their testing. And so I finally sucked it up and got diagnosed. So I was diagnosed last summer as AU ADHD. Um, so it's official for me now. So I'm sorry if I squirrel during some of these questions. Um,
You're good. We're talking about communication mismatches in the workplace.
so with that, it comes with you get your feedback and it says, be more professional. What does that mean? Right? Dress more professionally. Well, I've looked up what is professional dress, and I get 7 different answers because it depends on where you're working for what that means. Is it a jeans environment? Is it a suit environment? Is it something else? So how do you coach people for that? Some people need to pace during a meeting because they can't sit still, right? Some people need fidgets. I have a fidget on me right now so that I can fidget during this webinar, right? So how do you do that? For some of my folks that worked for me, I would draw pictures because I'm very visual. They needed to have bullets. So how do you treat people as individuals so that you make sure that they get the directions that they need? How do you break it down into those little pieces? I had a vice president that used to have his secretary call me and say, "Have Lee come down to my office." Why? Why am I coming down there? Am I in trouble?
The
Is it for something
anxiety.
good? It is the most anxiety producing thing ever, right? Meetings with no agendas. People who have ADHD or autism want to know why they're walking in so that they can prepare for that meeting. Slack or IMs that just go hi, and then 15 minutes later, like you want to know what they were trying to say. So those are those communication mismatches between folks in a meeting or in an office place that cause so much friction for folks. And they need to be able to say to each other, "This doesn't work for me. I need you to be clearer. I need you to be able to tell me clearly what you want from me. I know of one person that I'm coaching who would come in 30 minutes later than one of his coworkers. And because she had already sat down, had her coffee, and gone through her day, she would go to him immediately when he walked into the door and say, I need this. I need you to clarify this. He's like, I haven't even opened my computer yet. And he finally exploded. Finally, I had to coach him. You can't explode. You need to take her for a walk and say, I need this. This is my set boundary. And establish very calmly, very rationally, this is the boundary I need to have. And this is what I need from you. And she said, oh my God, I wish you had told me sooner. Right. But this is how you treat people as individuals. And this is how you are very respectful and calm in the workplace to be able to have these conversations.
Wow, so many great examples. You are just talking right now about communicating our needs at work, which is an essential skill for work and for life. When we think about self-advocacy in the workplace, most people, their brain goes straight to these big moments like disclosing a disability or requesting a formal accommodation. But self-advocacy really happens in those daily micro moments that you mentioned, asking for an agenda for the meeting, or even having the courage to ask a clarifying question. I run a program called ADHD Navigators, and one of the things that comes up is sometimes people are even scared to ask questions in meetings because they've gotten in trouble in the past for asking too many questions. So, from your work and the coaching that you do with people, what advice do you give around effective self advocacy? How can neurodivergent people effectively communicate their needs at work, especially when they don't want to disclose?
So a lot of folks don't want to disclose, but because you don't know if it's going to hurt you or help you. It is a matter of you need to say to people, I want to do a better job and I want to do the right job. So here, this is what I understand that you want. And could you just give me a little bit more information, right? You don't want to see combative. And I'm going to say this, and I apologize if it's sexist, because if you are a woman, you often seem aggressive or assertive. And if you are a woman of a certain age, it becomes harder to mask. So it is then at that point in your life, you definitely get branded as assertive or aggressive.
And
So I
women in
apologize if that came off wrong, but there is research that goes with that. That's when I was retired. So um,
And if
because
you're of a
it's a
certain
math,
race.
it's just harder to, pretend that you are not neurodivergent. Um, but you do try to explain, I want to do the right job. What I would do with my team is I would explain what I want and I would ask them, could you explain it back to me so I know that you heard what I said. And they were very funny because they would explain it back to me. And I'm like, I'm not sure I liked what I heard. So maybe that's not what I want you to do, right? Because maybe I wasn't sure. And we would draw pictures together and I had chicken scratch and they would take it with them because the picture actually helped them. So we would learn how to communicate to each other. And I always tell people when I'm coaching them, and this is out there also in a ton of research and suggestions, is your first one-on-one with your manager should be what's your best communication style? Is it email? Is it text? Is it phone calls? Is it in person? And then they should be asking you the same. What is your best form of communication? So you can start to level set with each other
Yes.
about that and get to know each other's communication style, whether you are neurodivergent or neurotypical, but especially if you are neurodivergent.
And I think this is great advice for everyone because we all have different communication styles. And unfortunately, too many neurodivergent people are labeled as difficult or aggressive when they simply may communicate with a different tone of voice or a different style. And so we need to create a lot more understanding around this. And I love the example you gave about drawing a picture. And it makes me think about Temple Grandin, who's a famous advocate in the autism community and a professor of animal science. In her book, she says, we live in a talkie culture. And a lot of times in the workplace, it's lots of like verbal information is shared a lot of times verbally. But some people think in pictures. They need images or their tactile processors or their kinesthetic processors. So I love that example of if you say something verbally, also use an image, send the information in writing, try, and educators, teachers know this, use different methods to communicate meeting to make sure that everyone can understand.
It's figure out what your staff needs. That's your
Yes,
job as a manager.
figure out what your staff needs and find out what their communication style is. I'm checking the time. I think what I'd love to do at this time is to bring Hiren back, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So let's take a momentary brain pause. We've heard a lot of great perspectives from Hiren and Lee. So for everybody that's on the webinar, I see we have over 500 people, which is amazing. What's one thing you want to remember from this discussion so far? What's one thing you want to take away? Let us know in the chat. I'm seeing Andrew said the aggressive feedback really hurts.
I'm sorry. From me or?
Oh, no. I think he was
okay.
resonating with what you were saying.
Yeah.
Jennifer
like
saying
either.
user manuals. Carla saying adjusting or being flexible with different communication styles. Okay, so I want to do a question for both of you about Hiren and EY's report. So last year, EY did a research study that was published about neurodiversity in the workplace. And Hiren talked earlier that your manager and psychological safety are the biggest drivers of neuroinclusion in the workplace. Something else that I found interesting in this report was about the impact of office environments on neurodivergent professionals. So our sensory environment, the sounds, the visuals. And as somebody myself with sensory processing challenges and has had sensory overload and meltdowns, I feel this. What I thought was interesting about this is there's different questions, but everybody, whether they're neurodivergent or not, everybody is impacted by sensory information in the environment. But it's just that neurodivergent people are impacted more. So when we make improvements to the environment, it's really going to help everyone. So my question for both of you is, what are some simple and tangible things that businesses can do to make the sensory environments more inclusive? And what are practical supports that neurodivergent people can use to support themselves in these workplace environments? So Hiren, I'll pass it to you first, and then we'll hear from Lee.
Yeah. Margaux, this is interesting, particularly today when we are seeing frontline workforce expanding, which means these are people working, whether you're in a warehouse, whether you're in a plant, whether you're in a physical environment. I mean, that is growing. And we're seeing office work necessarily not growing as much. Okay. So I think sensory input right now matters more than ever. And I think it starts, first of all, with each of us knowing what triggers us, what doesn't, what helps us feel better. Because if we don't know this, how will we ever communicate this to others? That's, to me, step one. Okay. I think step two is then figuring out in the flow of work, and Lee, you said something that really resonates with me. Each person wants to do a great job, and that's their goal. They want to show up and be great. So they say, do I need a 15-minute break? Do I need a dark room where I go into when I get migraines? Okay. Do I need to take a walk? I worked with one individual who had so much energy that if he did not kind of release this energy every 45 minutes to an hour, he couldn't think properly. And it wasn't rude that he had to leave a meeting. It was he's going to leave for 5 minutes and come back and be 10 times more engaged than opposed to staying here. So, Margaux, I think that, accommodations language needs to shift to performance enablers for everybody. We all need this to happen. And I think that, again, whether it's a simple headset or music or just quiet or being able to be off camera, which I had this conversation with someone just recently, and on camera sometimes is really stressful. So you don't want to be on camera. It could be you have a pile of laundry behind you, right? You don't want that. So I think it's important that we create flexible environments for people. And if we've got the comfort and the safety to be able to say, hey, I can't be on camera today, that should be okay. And we just move on for that. So I think there's a lot of things we can do. A lot of it hinges back on how comfortable do I feel speaking up. And if I say, listen, if I'm on camera, I'm not going to be able to take notes at the same time and to do this. If I was that person manager, I'd say, I need you to take notes. So please go off camera to do this. But I'll pause and Lee, see
I'm
what you
so
think.
So I'm
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 so,
reading the comments as they come in, and I can't tell you how many times I've stood on somebody's desk to unscrew the light bulb for the fluorescent lights because they were giving someone a migraine and I wasn't allowed to let them work from home. And then maintenance came in and said, "Oh, that light bulb was out," and then they screwed it back in. And I waited for them to leave, stood back on the desk, and unscrewed the light bulb for them because I knew they would get a migraine. And I'm wearing a fidget ring to whoever is talking about fidget jewelry. So yes, and we have to make that a norm, right? To be able to fidget in a meeting or walk or do something or let somebody work from home if they need to. So one of the misconceptions when you were asking Hiren about misconceptions is that accommodations are expensive. That's the first misconception, is that accommodations are expensive, right? They're not. They're what someone just put in the chat. Let somebody doodle in a meeting. Let somebody fidget in a meeting. I had a boss of mine that was much older, and he's like, I need to have them in the office or they're not going to get their work done. Smart goals should be set on results and metrics. If somebody's not meeting their metrics, then I'm going to PIP them. Other than that, I'm going to treat them like an adult. I don't care where they are. I don't care what happens. As long as they get their work done, they're good. If they need to fidget, if they need to walk, if they need to doodle, if they need to do whatever, if they're hitting their goals and their metrics, I'm happy.
Yeah. Margaux, can I just add something? Because Lee made me think of this. I think one, if you're not using even a free version of any generative AI tool, Copilot is great, or Gemini, or any of them. Okay. I think using them, capture your notes. Some folks have Otter. I see that's coming in, or others. So one, I think AI can be an assistive technology. I think that's clear. The other angle on this, funny enough, in many cases, AI is also a black box. You don't know how it thinks. You don't know how it got to the answer. And how you communicate with AI is also different. So the reason I'm pointing this out is we shift back to neurotypicals and everyone else to say, changing your communication style and understanding logic necessarily. It may not make sense to you because look at AI. You don't know how AI gets to these answers necessarily. So I think this is a good time for us to talk about changes in communication, assistive technology, and things that create a better working environment for all. Because I think we could use the window and the opportunity of AI to drive that conversation to all.
It's also a good time to talk about training. You and I had talked about this, Margaux. We do a lot of online training where we hand somebody a video and say, here's your training package, and finish it and take an online test. Did somebody learn anything from
Right.
that online, or did they click the buttons and take the test? The measurement of that metric is that somebody finished the video As
Right.
somebody with ADHD, I let the video play, and I can tell you I played a game on my phone while it did its thing, or I kept working while it did its thing. And I knew I could answer the questions at the end because, quite frankly, multitasking is one of my
Yes.
superpowers, right?
Lord, yeah. Lord knows.
Multitasking multitasking is my superpower. I took care of 300 contracts at the same time when I worked for J&J. Multitasking is a superpower. So, I clicked on the buttons, I passed the test, and I moved on. So,
Yeah.
what did it measure?
Yeah.
Having some of your training in person, especially when you have folks that are neurodivergent, makes sure that you have people that are engaged.
Absolutely. I love this book called Raise the Room, and it talks about participant-centered facilitation. And one of the cool factoids I learned is that when people have the opportunity to talk out loud, they remember 3 times more than if they don't talk. And Universal Design for Learning tells us that we need multiple ways for people to engage with the information. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, the ADHD Navigators program, I facilitate it live. Because Lord knows, as somebody with ADHD, I've bought online courses that I've not finished or not started, right? And so even in this tech-driven world, there is still such a value to being able to connect as humans in a live setting where people can, role play scenarios, share their experiences with each other. I want to wrap up this portion so we can get to some audience questions, but I'm just going to reflect back some of the things that I heard you both say in terms of practical, tangible things that people can take away from this in their environment. Understanding that professionalism looks differently. If people need to fidget, uh, or stimming stands for self-stimulatory behavior. So if they need to fidget and move around, understand they're not being unprofessional, they're regulating their nervous system, they're processing information, and that's actually how they're staying focused. So listening can look different for everyone. Camera off flexibility, super important. Camera on can be really overstimulating for some people. It can be exhausting because then people are masking and performing instead of actually being able to really listen and kind of focus on the work. Agendas in advance, flexibility just in general, and having those conversations, if you are a manager, having those conversations with your team members to understand what are their unique strengths, what are the areas they need support. Because all of us, whether we're neurodivergent or not, have unique strengths in areas where we need support. Thank you both for your insights. I'd like to transition us to audience questions. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to ask the NOD team looks like there's a number of questions that have come in. What is the first one we should start with here? Okay, maybe they can't talk. I'm looking at the panel now.
Hi, Margaux. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Hi,
Bridget.
hi. I'm going to read one out to you all that I think you've all sort of touched on, but I think might be helpful to go into a little bit deeper. It says, a lot of us mid to late career folks with late diagnosis have developed coping skills to survive, but not all of them are good or sustainable. What are your recommendations to unlearn the quote unquote bad stuff?
I got a coach and a mentor to help me unlearn some of the bad stuff. And at some point, I decided to change fields. I just didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lee, I'll add on, Margaret, just real quick. I think, Lee, as you pointed, sometimes you need somebody else to point out to you the toll that coping mechanism that you use maybe in the workplace, and maybe how it's showing up when you're done with work and at home. Maybe you can't see this yourself, but I think the coach also helps you then with alternative strategies. What would be a more healthier way to do this? I do think that with more and more awareness around neurodiversity, hopefully we are starting to shift the tide that it's not a complete unknown to people. but I think it's really hard to do this by yourself. And so creating some community, I know at work, neurodiversity communities and ERGs these are great places, I think, to learn from others. Because I think then you hear, oh, you use that, maybe I can try it. Funny, I saw that in the chat today as well. So I think some of that sharing with each other really helps as well.
Yes, professional and peer support, so helpful, whether that's therapy, a coach, like Lee mentioned, community support. There's so much wisdom and power in community. And I know for myself, as somebody late diagnosed, I really was struggling with people pleasing, perfectionism, workaholism, because since I was undiagnosed, I went almost 30 years. So I had to work twice as hard to keep up. And the thing with neurodivergent people, a lot of times they can be high performers doing the work, but you don't see the toll that it takes. You don't see the cost. They might seem fine at work, but they get home and they're completely depleted, having headaches, dizziness. So a lot of times the struggles are below the surface, but such a good question. And it's a process of unlearning, and it takes some time. But the important thing is that you have the awareness, and little by little you can shift towards more helpful ways of working that are more sustainable.
It takes a long time.
All right, we have a question from Alexandra. Corporate speak can be really hard to learn. Oof, I feel that. How do we navigate that?
Yeah.
Corporate
So
speak is different in every field.
yeah.
So, I mean, I had one job where a coworker handed me a dictionary. So I don't know.
A
Hiren,
dictionary? What do you mean?
Partners Healthcare had its own set of terms for certain things that was distinct for Partners Healthcare. And somebody actually handed me pages that said these are the terms you have to learn in order to survive certain meetings. So I literally texted in meetings, what did this mean? So here, and I don't know. How do you?
Yeah. Lee, I'm laughing because the one that we had quickly became outdated because we all love to make up new acronyms all the time. And we then had
Right.
acronyms that actually meant 3 or 4 different things because people, and so, my one thing I'd say is ask, 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 always ask. And so the more we ask, what does that mean? I saw somebody said, in the chat, we kept saying L&D. I think someone
Labor and
said,
delivery, and
does that
somebody
mean
else meant
labor and
something
delivery? And I
else,
love
and
that.
right.
I love that. So I think we just have to keep calling it out and asking.
And if
Yeah,
our workplace,
I would text a friend. I am somebody in the middle of the meeting. I would do whatever so I didn't look stupid.
and the thing is, sometimes when we ask people to define what they mean, there's probably other people in the room that also don't know what it means, but they're too afraid to ask. And so I always remember that, because half the times when I've been like, oh, what does this acronym mean? There's other people slacking me like, oh, I'm glad you asked that because I had no idea either.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Margaret, I think sometimes it could be an advocate and an ally in the room, right? Somebody who already knows but realizes there's other people that don't. That's great when they speak up and say, "Oh, let's make sure everybody knows what we mean by that."
Yeah. I'm seeing a question here from Anonymous. How can we address in our workplaces that self-advocacy from Black neurodivergent employees can be seen differently, seen as aggressive or defiant by managers or HR, and often are penalized? Yes, it is unfair that Black neurodivergent employees are often more penalized by their communication style because of racial bias and ableism. Lee, I know you said you did some research on this. The one thing I'll say is there's some really there's some leaders in this space. Like one of my mentors is Inger Sheikh Holsey, who runs the Black Professionals ADHD Alliance and specifically does executive coaching with Black professionals with ADHD. And there's others out there who are doing good work in this space that I wanted to highlight. But Lee, you're here, and if you have any other thoughts on this.
So it's unfortunate because A, it comes to coaching, but B, it'll come to masking, which is, to figure out how to fit into that mold, which I don't think is correct. I think it should be the other way, that the managers should be trained to understand that this is the individual. But unfortunately, it will probably go the other way, that they will be coached by somebody as to how to fit in. And that's the unfortunate part, right? That's where I was saying, especially when you become a woman of a certain age and you can't mask as well as you used to, that's when you start to become redefined, right? And then you'll be coached how to start to, pull back again. And it's burnout. So I can say they can go to a coach, like, this person that I'd love to meet. But that's where it goes here. And I don't know if you have any other experience.
Lee and Margaux, the only other way that we've approached this was there's different communication styles across the board. This is one of the things that neurodivergence gives us, is it almost starts to strip away a little bit of, is that male communication skill? Is that female? Is that Black professional? Is that Latino? Because that spectrum of communication style. So in a way, we've almost had to address this in just the realm of different communications without touching on anything else. And I'm saying this because I'm oversimplifying, but this is a difficult challenge.
But that's where you have a well-trained manager who has learned to treat somebody as an individual within the normal workplace where you haven't had that training.
Yes.
That's not the norm.
Yeah. And redefining what professional communication means in the workplace. This is a great segue to the next question, which I think might be our last question, just given the time. This is from Shar. What is the most important next step as a manager to reset with team members? So I guess what I'm interpreting, if there's a manager here who's listening who wants to get started with their team on neuroinclusion, what could be like a tangible next step?
Oh, I mean, I can do the plug. Read my book, right?
Like it.
I don't know how to tell you, but learn how to do a good one-on-one. Learn how to listen to your staff. Understand that feedback has to be immediate, right? That one-on-ones are once a week. Feedback is immediate, right? You don't wait for an annual review because that's too late. You've waited a year. Whatever you're telling them at the end of the year doesn't matter. If somebody did something that is correctable, you tell them at that moment, this is what happened in that meeting. Perhaps you wanted to try it in this other manner. You might have had a better result. Right? And it's not a critical thing. It's perhaps, and this might have been another way to try it. Hiren?
Yeah. I'll give two quick pieces. Educate yourself. Read Lee's book. Our friends at NOD have some great training. Take that training. And two, talk about this with your team. Not about diagnosis, but about the beauty and of thinking differently and the divergence and the spectrum of perspectives that you need. The moment you start talking about it, you start creating psychological safety for others.
Right. Ask them what you can do better. I would ask my team all the time, what can I do better?
Thank you so much. Speaking of learning, the National Organization on Disability is launching Enable Learning this July, but they are piloting it now and actively looking for feedback. So all of you on this call, if you want to learn more, you have the opportunity to join the waitlist to pilot this learning system. And it's designed to help organizations embed inclusion, adaptability, and workforce readiness into their everyday operations. So they have an office hours coming up. NOD also has another event coming up, AI for Accessibility, Inclusive Tech in Action, happening on Friday, May 15th. All of these details, I believe, will be emailed out to those who registered for this event. So you can click the links and learn more. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day for this important conversation on neuro-inclusion in the workplace. And I want to thank you, Lee and Hiren, for taking time to share some of your experiences, your wisdom, your insights, and tangible tips that we can all take back to our work starting today to create a workplace for minds of all kinds to thrive. Thank you all.